The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the towering pines of Raven Creek National Park, painting long golden shadows over the forest floor. Birds filled the cool autumn air with their songs, while a gentle mist drifted above the creek that wound quietly through the valley. Forest Ranger Daniel Carter guided his pickup truck along an old gravel road that few visitors ever used anymore. Beside him sat Max. The 6-year-old German Shepherd rested calmly in the passenger seat, watching the forest through the window. His ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound, and his amber eyes never stopped scanning the trees. Daniel smiled. "Looks like another quiet morning partner." Max answered with a gentle wag of his tail. For nearly 5 years they had patrolled Raven Creek together. They had rescued lost hikers, located injured wildlife, and even helped stop illegal hunters. Max had earned the respect of every ranger in the park. His instincts had never failed. As they approached the eastern section of the park, Daniel slowed the truck beside an old warning sign, almost hidden beneath vines. "Road closed. Raven Creek Bridge. No public access." The weathered sign looked as old as the trees surrounding it. Daniel stepped out and stretched. "This place hasn't changed." 40 years earlier, Raven Creek Bridge had been closed after a violent flood destroyed part of its wooden structure. According to official records, Forest Ranger Samuel Reed had disappeared while helping evacuate visitors during the disaster. Despite weeks of searching, rescuers never found him. The bridge was abandoned. Nature slowly reclaimed it. Over the years, local residents began sharing strange stories. Some claimed they heard footsteps on the empty bridge late at night. Others said lights sometimes appeared through the trees, even though nobody was allowed near the area. Daniel had never believed the rumors. Old places always attracted old legends. He clipped Max's leash onto his harness. "Let's take a look." The narrow trail leading toward the bridge was almost completely hidden beneath fallen leaves. Towering pines blocked much of the sunlight, creating patches of light and shadow across the forest floor. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, the old bridge finally appeared. Its massive wooden beams were covered with moss. Several support cables hung loose. Rust stained the metal railings. Warning barriers still blocked both entrances. The bridge looked frozen in time. Daniel stopped to take a few inspection photos. Max did not. The German Shepherd stared silently at the bridge. His ears stood forward. His nose lifted into the cool air. Then he slowly walked toward the entrance. Daniel called softly, "Max." The dog didn't move. Instead, he stood beside the first weathered plank, staring toward the center of the bridge. Daniel frowned. "Come on." Still nothing. Max had ignored commands only a handful of times during their years together. Each time he had been right. Daniel approached. "What do you smell?" Max lowered his nose onto one of the old wooden boards. He sniffed carefully. Then another. He circled the entrance twice before sitting down directly in front of the bridge, refusing to leave. Daniel gently tugged on the leash. Max remained seated, not frightened, not confused, simply determined. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. He knelt beside his partner. The bridge was silent. Only the creek flowed beneath the weathered timbers. Then Max suddenly stood. He walked to the edge of the entrance and looked over the side toward the rocky bank below. His tail became perfectly still. Daniel followed his gaze. Nothing, only moss-covered rocks and flowing water. Yet Max refused to look away. Minutes passed. Finally, Daniel unclipped the leash. "Show me." Without hesitation, Max turned away from the bridge and followed a narrow path leading down toward the creek. The trail was barely visible beneath thick ferns and tangled vines. No footprints, no signs of recent visitors, only untouched forest. After a short climb down the rocky slope, Max stopped beside an enormous boulder resting against one of the old bridge supports. He sniffed intensely, then scratched gently at the ground with one paw. Daniel stepped closer. At first he saw only wet leaves and loose stones. Then something metallic caught the morning sunlight. He knelt and carefully brushed away decades of dirt. A tarnished metal badge slowly appeared beneath the moss. Daniel lifted it carefully into his hand. The Forest Service emblem was still visible. Below it, one engraved name had somehow survived 40 years beneath the forest floor. Samuel Reed. Daniel stared at the badge in complete silence. Behind him, Max remained standing beside the old bridge, watching quietly, almost as if he had known exactly where to find it. Daniel carefully turned the tarnished badge over in his hands. Despite decades beneath layers of dirt and moss, the engraving remained surprisingly clear. Samuel Reed, the same Samuel Reed who had disappeared 40 years earlier. For a long moment, Daniel simply stared at the name. According to every official report, Samuel had vanished during the devastating flood that destroyed Raven Creek Bridge. Search teams had spent nearly 3 weeks combing the forest, diving into the creek, and flying helicopters over the valley. They had never found a single personal belonging. Not his backpack, not his radio, not even his ranger badge. Yet here it was, hidden beneath a massive boulder beside the bridge. Daniel looked toward Max. The German Shepherd stood quietly beside the old bridge, Supporter's nose still pointed toward the ground. "You knew something was here, didn't you?" Max wagged his tail once but didn't move. Daniel photographed the badge from every angle before placing it carefully inside an evidence bag. Then he began searching the surrounding area. The rocky bank showed no recent footprints, only thick, moss-scattered leaves and tree roots twisting through the stones. Everything appeared untouched. Still, Daniel couldn't ignore one question. If Samuel had lost his badge during the flood, why had it been trapped beneath a boulder nearly 20 feet away from the bridge? The location made no sense. He crouched beside the rock and studied it more closely. It was enormous, far too heavy for floodwaters alone to have rolled into place. Someone or something had hidden the badge there. Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood forward. Without barking, he walked beneath the bridge. Daniel followed. The wooden beams overhead creaked softly in the breeze. Sunlight slipped through gaps between the weathered planks, creating bright patterns across the creek below. Max slowly sniffed each support post before stopping beside one that leaned slightly toward the water. He stared at the timber. Daniel ran his hand across the rough wood. Near the base, almost invisible beneath moss, he noticed several shallow scratches. They weren't random. Someone had carved a symbol into the beam many years ago. After brushing away the moss, the carving became clear. A simple arrow. It pointed downstream. Daniel immediately took another photograph. Samuel had left a trail. Or someone wanted it to look that way. Max continued following the creek. The narrow path curved between large rocks and ancient pine trees whose roots clung tightly to the riverbank. After several hundred yards, the German Shepherd stopped again. This time, he stood beside an old stone marker almost completely swallowed by vines. Daniel pushed the vegetation aside. The faded words were barely readable. Maintenance trail. For he unfolded the park's modern map, the trail no longer existed. It had been removed from official maps decades earlier, yet the old marker proved it had once loomed somewhere important. Daniel marked the location on his GPS. His curiosity continued to grow. Someone had erased more than just an abandoned trail. As they prepared to head back, Daniel looked once more toward the silent bridge. Max remained facing it. He didn't want to leave. It was as if the German Shepherd believed the bridge was still guarding one final secret. Back at the ranger station that afternoon, Daniel searched through archived files stored in the basement records room. Dust covered nearly every box. Most hadn't been opened in years. Finally, he located Samuel Reed's personnel file. Inside were patrol reports, weather records, and newspaper clippings about the flood. Everything matched the official story. Until Daniel reached the final page. A photograph that should have shown Samuel's recovered equipment was missing. Only 4 small holes remained where it had once been attached. Someone had deliberately removed it. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Now, there were 2 impossible discoveries in a single day. Samuel's badge had been hidden beneath the bridge, and evidence had disappeared from the official investigation. Across the room, Max quietly lifted his head. The German Shepherd looked toward the window facing Raven Creek, as if he already knew they would be returning to the bridge first thing in the morning. The following morning, Daniel arrived at Raven Creek before sunrise. A thin layer of mist floated above the water, giving the abandoned bridge an almost ghostly appearance. The old warning barriers still blocked the entrance, and the weathered wooden planks creaked softly whenever the wind passed through the valley. Max jumped from the truck before Daniel even opened his own door. Instead of heading directly to the bridge, the German Shepherd trotted toward the narrow path leading to the old stone marker they had discovered the previous day. "You remember, don't you?" Daniel said with a faint smile. Max never looked back. The forgotten maintenance trail was barely visible beneath decades of fallen leaves. Thick vines wrapped around broken signposts, while young pine trees had grown across sections of the path, hiding it from anyone who wasn't searching carefully. Daniel compared the location with an old survey map he had copied from the park archives. The trail had once connected Raven Creek Bridge to a small ranger maintenance station nearly a mile away. Curiously, there was no mention of that station in any modern park records. As they continued, Max slowed his pace. His nose moved steadily over the ground before stopping beside an old wooden post lying almost completely buried beneath moss. Daniel knelt and brushed away the dirt. A faded metal plate remained attached to the post. Trail 4. Authorized personnel only. He photographed the marker. Someone had intentionally erased this route from official maps, yet pieces of it still survived in the forest. A few minutes later, the trail climbed a gentle hill overlooking the creek. The bridge could still be seen through gaps in the trees. Max suddenly froze. His ears stood upright. He stared toward a cluster of dense bushes growing beside a large fallen pine. Daniel carefully approached. "What did you find?" The German Shepherd pushed his nose beneath the branches. Then he pawed gently at the ground. Hidden beneath layers of leaves was an old wooden box. The lid had rotted away long ago, but rusty hinges remained attached to one side. Inside lay several glass bottles, broken tools, and a small rusted lantern. None of them seemed unusual, until Daniel noticed a leather notebook tucked beneath the debris. Most of the cover had deteriorated, but several pages remained dry enough to read. It wasn't Samuel Reed's handwriting. Instead, the notebook contained maintenance records written by different park employees. One entry immediately caught Daniel's attention. Bridge inspection postponed by supervisor's order. The date was only 3 days before the flood that supposedly destroyed Raven Creek Bridge. Another note had been written underneath in different handwriting. Samuel disagreed. He said the bridge wasn't the real problem. Daniel read the sentence twice. If Samuel believed something else was wrong, why had that information never appeared in the official investigation? He carefully sealed the notebook inside an evidence bag. Max had already moved farther uphill. The German Shepherd stopped beside a massive oak tree whose roots stretched across the abandoned trail. He sniffed the bark before looking toward the forest beyond. Daniel followed his gaze. In the distance stood the weathered remains of a small wooden building, almost completely hidden by vegetation. Only part of the roof was still visible through the trees. It matched the location of the missing maintenance station on the old survey map. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. After 40 years, they had finally found the forgotten building. As they walked toward it, Max remained unusually alert. His movements became slower, more cautious. The closer they came, the stronger his reaction became. Daniel rested one hand on the dog's shoulder. "We'll check it together." The old station stood in complete silence. Broken windows reflected the morning sunlight. The front door hung crooked on a single rusted hinge. No footprints surrounded the cabin. No signs of recent visitors. Only decades of dust, moss, and creeping vines. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel Reed had left this place for a reason. Taking a deep breath, he slowly pushed the door open. The hinges groaned loudly. Sunlight spilled into the dark interior. And just inside the doorway, Max suddenly stopped. Then he let out a low warning growl. Max's low growl echoed through the abandoned ranger station. Daniel froze at the doorway. The room was dim with only thin beams of morning sunlight slipping through broken windows. Dust floated in the air, undisturbed for decades. Fallen ceiling boards lay scattered across the wooden floor, while vines pushed through cracks in the walls, slowly reclaiming the building. "Easy, Max," Daniel whispered. The German Shepherd didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the far corner of the room. Daniel slowly swept his flashlight across the station. Old shelves lined one wall, holding rusted lanterns, broken tools, and empty supply boxes. A cracked cast-iron stove stood near the center, covered in thick dust. Everything suggested the station had been abandoned shortly after the bridge was closed. Yet something felt wrong. Nothing looked disturbed, almost too perfect. Max carefully walked forward, sniffing the floor one step at a time. Daniel followed close behind. Near the back wall, Max suddenly stopped beside an old wooden desk that had partially collapsed under the weight of time. The dog lowered his head. Then he nudged one of the broken drawers with his nose. The drawer moved slightly. Daniel knelt and carefully pulled it open. Inside lay only scattered papers, their ink faded beyond recognition. Beneath them rested a small brass key attached to a leather tag. The tag carried a single handwritten word, bridge. Daniel stared at it. A bridge key. He photographed it before placing it into an evidence bag. The discovery raised even more questions. Why would a maintenance station keep a key labeled simply bridge? And why had no one ever mentioned it? Max moved away from the desk. He circled the room once before, stopping beside the stone fireplace. Unlike the rest of the station, the fireplace looked unusually clean. Very little dust had settled across its base. Daniel examined the stones carefully. One of them seemed slightly loose. Using both hands, he pulled it forward. Behind it was a narrow compartment hidden inside the chimney. His flashlight revealed a small metal box. The lid was badly rusted but still intact. Daniel carefully opened it. Inside was a folded map of Raven Creek. Several locations had been marked in blue pencil. One mark circled the abandoned bridge. Another pointed toward an area farther downstream. A third symbol, drawn as a small triangle, appeared deep inside the surrounding forest. No explanation accompanied the markings. Folded beneath the map was a single photograph. Daniel gently brushed away the dust. The image showed Samuel Reed standing beside the bridge with 3 other rangers. Everyone was smiling. The date stamped on the corner caught Daniel's attention. It had been taken only 2 days before the flood. If the bridge had already been considered unsafe, why were they still working there? More importantly, who were the other 3 men? Daniel turned the photograph over. Someone had written a short sentence in blue ink. If the bridge is closed, follow the old water route. Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears locked forward. This time Daniel heard it too. A faint metallic sound. Clang. Then another. It came from somewhere beneath the floor. The two stood perfectly still. The sound disappeared. Daniel slowly knelt and pressed one hand against the wooden boards. They felt hollow. He tapped them gently. One section echoed differently from the rest. Max immediately walked over and placed both front paws on the exact same spot. Daniel looked down. Hidden beneath decades of dust was the outline of a square wooden hatch. Its iron handle was almost completely concealed beneath dirt. His heartbeat quickened. Someone had built a hidden compartment beneath the ranger station. Daniel brushed away the remaining dust until the handle was fully exposed. He wrapped both hands around the rusted iron ring. Taking a deep breath, he pulled upward with all his strength. The hatch groaned loudly. Then, after 40 years of silence, it slowly began to open. The hatch resisted at first. Its rusted hinges groaned as Daniel pulled harder, sending years of dust drifting into the air. Max stepped back, but kept his eyes fixed on the opening. Finally, the heavy wooden door lifted just enough for Daniel to shine his flashlight inside. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness. Cold air drifted upward, carrying the smell of damp stone and old wood. Daniel swallowed. This wasn't on any map. Max moved closer, sniffed the opening, then looked back at Daniel. Without hesitation, the German Shepherd began walking down the stairs. Daniel followed carefully. Each wooden step creaked beneath his boots, but the staircase remained surprisingly solid despite its age. At the bottom, they entered a small underground chamber carved into the rock beneath the ranger station. Unlike the abandoned room above, this place was dry. Someone had gone to great lengths to protect it. Wooden shelves lined the walls. Most were empty. Only a few dusty storage boxes remained untouched. Daniel slowly searched the chamber. Old maintenance tools hung neatly on one wall. A rusted hand pump stood in one corner. Nothing appeared unusual until Max stopped beside a large wooden cabinet. The dog scratched gently at its base. Daniel opened the cabinet. Inside were dozens of old maintenance records tied together with faded string. Most documented routine bridge inspections from decades ago. Then, one folder immediately caught his attention. Raven Creek Structural Reports. He opened it carefully. The first several pages described normal maintenance work. Then the final report changed everything. According to the engineer who inspected the bridge only 3 days before the flood, the structure was still safe. Minor repairs had been recommended. Nothing more. Daniel frowned. That directly contradicted the official report claiming the bridge had been on the verge of collapse. Someone had altered the story. He photographed every page before sealing the folder inside an evidence bag. Max had already wandered deeper into the chamber. The German shepherd stopped beside another stone wall. This time, he didn't bark. He simply stared. Daniel walked over. At first, the wall appeared completely natural. Then his flashlight revealed several fresh-looking scratches on one stone. Unlike the weathered rock surrounding it, this section seemed slightly different. He pushed against it. Nothing happened. He tried again. The stone shifted. A narrow opening appeared behind it. Hidden inside was a long metal cylinder sealed with wax. Daniel carefully removed it. The wax had cracked with age, but the contents remained dry. Inside were several rolled documents, a hand-drawn map, 2 undeveloped rolls of film, and a sealed envelope addressed simply to whoever finds this. Daniel stared silently at the envelope. Samuel Reed had expected someone to discover this place one day. Before opening it, he photographed every item exactly as he found it. Nothing could be disturbed without documentation. As he reached for the letter, Max suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood straight. A low growl filled the chamber. Daniel immediately switched off his flashlight. Silence. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy. They came from directly above them. Someone was inside the abandoned ranger station. The wooden floor creaked. A second set of footsteps followed. There were at least 2 people. Daniel held his breath. Max remained perfectly still beside him. Neither made a sound. Dust drifted from the ceiling as whoever stood above began moving furniture across the floor. One voice finally broke the silence. "Search every room," another answered quietly. "If the old ranger hid anything, it has to be here." Daniel tightened his grip on Samuel's sealed letter. After 40 years, someone else was still searching for exactly the same secret. Daniel remained perfectly still. Above them, the wooden floor creaked again as the 2 strangers continued searching the abandoned ranger station. Every scrape of a chair across the floor echoed through the hidden chamber. Max stood beside him without making a sound. The German shepherd's ears stayed locked toward the ceiling. Daniel slowly slipped the sealed envelope inside his backpack. Whatever Samuel Reed had hidden, it was too important to leave behind. The footsteps moved closer. For a tense moment, Daniel thought someone had discovered the hidden hatch. Instead, another voice broke the silence. "Nothing here. We're wasting time." The first man answered quietly. "He left something behind. I'm sure of it." Several seconds later, the footsteps moved toward the front of the station. A door slammed shut. Silence returned. Daniel waited another 5 full minutes before switching on his flashlight. "We're clear." Max relaxed slightly, but continued watching the staircase. Daniel carefully opened Samuel's envelope. The paper inside had yellowed with age, yet the handwriting remained remarkably clear. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. "If you are reading this, I failed to stop them," Daniel continued. "The bridge was never closed because it was unsafe." His heartbeat quickened. Someone wanted the bridge abandoned. He read every line slowly. Samuel explained that weeks before the flood, he had discovered unusual activity near Raven Creek Bridge. Several trucks had been entering the park after dark. They never used the main roads, Instead, they disappeared into the forest through an old maintenance route beneath the bridge. Samuel had secretly followed them. What he found shocked him. The bridge wasn't being used for transportation. It was hiding something. According to the letter, a natural cave system beneath Raven Creek contained valuable archaeological artifacts dating back hundreds of years. Rather than reporting the discovery, a criminal group had begun stealing the artifacts and selling them on the black market. Closing the bridge after the flood created the perfect cover. No visitors, no patrols, no witnesses. Samuel had gathered evidence for weeks. He planned to expose everyone involved. Then came the final paragraph. If anything happens to me, don't search the bridge. Search beneath the water. Daniel looked up. Beneath the water, Max immediately stood. His tail remained still. The German shepherd stared toward the underground chamber's far wall. Daniel followed his gaze. A narrow stream of water trickled through a crack in the rock. He walked closer. The crack widened into a low tunnel just large enough for a person to crawl through. Fresh air drifted from the opening. The underground passage clearly connected to the creek outside. Samuel must have used it as a hidden escape route. Daniel smiled faintly. You planned everything. He rolled up the letter and placed it inside a waterproof evidence tube. Then he followed Max into the narrow passage. After several minutes of crawling, daylight appeared ahead. The tunnel opened behind a curtain of vines along the creek bank, nearly 50 yards downstream from the bridge. No one standing above would ever notice the exit. Daniel climbed outside. The afternoon sun reflected across the water. The old bridge stood silently in the distance. Max suddenly trotted toward the edge of the creek. He sniffed several large rocks before stopping beside a calm pool beneath the bridge. The German shepherd looked directly into the crystal-clear water. Daniel stepped beside him. At first, he saw only smooth stones beneath the surface. Then, sunlight reflected off something unnatural. A straight metal edge, almost completely buried beneath sand. He narrowed his eyes. It looked like a large steel box. Hidden beneath the creek for 40 years, Daniel's pulse quickened. If Samuel's letter was true, the final evidence had never been inside the ranger station at all. It had been waiting beneath the water, exactly where no one had thought to look. Daniel knelt beside the quiet pool beneath Raven Creek Bridge. The afternoon sunlight shimmered across the clear water, making it difficult to see the object resting below the surface. Max stood silently beside him, his eyes never leaving the same spot. You found it, Daniel whispered. He removed his boots and stepped carefully into the icy creek. The water reached his knees before he arrived above the object. Using both hands, he brushed away years of sand and gravel. A rectangular steel box slowly emerged. Its surface was covered with rust, but it remained remarkably intact. Heavy steel handles were attached to each side. Daniel tugged once. It didn't move. The box was wedged tightly between two large rocks. He climbed back onto the bank. Looks like we'll need some help. Using a lightweight recovery rope from his patrol pack, Daniel secured one end around the handle. The other end he tied to a sturdy pine tree. Working carefully, he tightened the rope with a portable hand winch. The steel box shifted, just an inch, then another. Finally, it slid free from the rocks beneath the water. Together, Daniel and Max pulled it onto the creek bank. Water poured from its weathered surface. The lid was secured with two heavy metal latches. Surprisingly, they weren't locked. Daniel opened them slowly. The hinges groaned after decades beneath the creek. Inside, everything had been wrapped in waterproof canvas. Samuel Reed had prepared for this. Layer by layer, Daniel removed the contents: a leather-bound journal, several sealed evidence envelopes, a stack of photographs, an old portable radio, and a small metal lockbox. Everything appeared dry. Daniel opened the journal first. Unlike Samuel's patrol notebook, this one contained only investigative notes: license plate numbers, vehicle descriptions, dates, times, names. Every page documented suspicious nighttime activity around Raven Creek. Samuel had been building a complete case. Daniel continued reading. One sentence had been underlined twice. Never assume the flood was an accident. His heartbeat quickened. The next pages explained why. Samuel believed explosives had been used to weaken part of the bridge supports before the storm arrived. The flood had simply finished the job. Closing the bridge permanently allowed the criminal operation beneath the valley to continue without interruption. Daniel looked back at the old bridge. For 40 years, everyone had blamed nature, but Samuel had suspected sabotage from the very beginning. Max suddenly barked. Only once. Daniel looked up. Fresh tire tracks crossed the muddy road above the creek. They hadn't been there earlier. Someone had arrived. He quickly repacked the evidence. The lockbox remained unopened. There wasn't time. Another vehicle door slammed in the distance. Voices echoed through the trees. They're near the bridge. Spread out. Daniel's pulse raced. Whoever these people were, they knew exactly where to search. He grabbed the steel box. Too heavy. He couldn't carry everything. Thinking quickly, he removed the waterproof evidence packages and placed them inside his backpack. The empty steel box he pushed back into the creek beneath the overhanging rocks. From a distance, it vanished beneath the water once again. Max watched every movement. Let's go. Instead of climbing toward the bridge, Daniel followed the creek downstream through dense vegetation. The German Shepherd stayed only a few steps ahead, choosing the safest route. Minutes later, they reached another bend where thick bushes completely hid them from view. Daniel stopped to catch his breath. Behind them, distant voices continued searching around the bridge. One man shouted angrily. "It's gone," another answered. "They got here first." Daniel looked at Max and smiled, despite the danger. Samuel protected this evidence for 40 years. He tightened the straps on his backpack. "We're going to make sure it reaches the truth." Max wagged his tail once. Then, without warning, he lifted his head toward the forest. Another scent. Another trail. The investigation wasn't over yet. The unopened metal lockbox still rested safely inside Daniel's backpack, and whatever it contained might finally explain exactly who had betrayed Samuel Reed 40 years ago. Daniel and Max didn't stop until they were nearly a mile from Raven Creek Bridge. Hidden beneath a grove of towering pines, Daniel finally allowed himself to catch his breath. The voices behind them had faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of birds and the gentle flow of the creek. Max stood watch at the edge of the trees. The German Shepherd's ears remained alert, but he no longer growled. For the moment, they were safe. Daniel carefully removed the small metal lockbox from his backpack. Unlike the larger steel chest, this box was surprisingly well preserved. A thick rubber seal had protected it from moisture for decades. There was no keyhole, only a small rotating latch. He turned it slowly. With a quiet click, the lid opened. Inside lay 3 carefully wrapped items. The first was a folded sheet of paper sealed inside a waterproof sleeve. The second was a brass key attached to a faded leather tag. The third was a small roll of undeveloped camera film. Daniel unfolded the letter first. The handwriting belonged to Samuel Reed. If this box has been opened, then someone finally followed the trail correctly. Daniel continued reading. Samuel explained that he had divided the evidence into several hiding places because he feared everything would be destroyed if it were discovered together. The journal documented his investigation. The photographs showed the criminals, but the final film contained something even more important. It captured the moment the bridge supports were deliberately damaged only hours before the flood. Samuel had hidden the undeveloped film separately because it was the strongest proof that the disaster had not been an accident. Daniel carefully placed the film back inside its protective sleeve. Then he picked up the brass key. The leather tag carried only 2 handwritten words: Pump House. Daniel frowned. He immediately unfolded the old maintenance map recovered from the ranger station. Near the southern end of Raven Creek, one forgotten building appeared. Old Water Pump Station. It had been abandoned decades before the bridge closed. No modern trail led there. Samuel had left one final destination. Max suddenly stood. He sniffed the breeze before turning toward the south, almost as if he recognized the direction himself. Daniel smiled. "I think that's where we're going." By late afternoon, they reached the abandoned pump house. The small stone building stood beside the creek, surrounded by thick ivy and towering pine trees. Broken windows reflected the fading sunlight. The rusted metal door remained locked. Daniel removed the brass key from his pocket. It slid perfectly into the ancient lock. One turn. The mechanism clicked open. The heavy door slowly creaked inward. Inside, dust covered every surface. Old water pipes crossed the ceiling. A massive pump sat silently in the center of the room. Nothing appeared unusual. Max entered first. He ignored the machinery completely. Instead, he walked behind the pump and sniffed the stone wall. Then he pawed twice at the floor. Daniel knelt beside him. Hidden beneath decades of dust was another iron hatch, smaller than the one beneath the ranger station. Fresh scrape marks surrounded its edges. Daniel's expression changed. Someone had opened it recently, very recently. Before he could react, Max's ears snapped forward. The German shepherd growled. This time, the sound came from outside. Vehicle doors slammed. Footsteps hurried toward the pump house. Several voices echoed through the trees. "We know they're in there." Daniel quietly switched off his flashlight. His hand rested on the hatch handle. If the strangers entered through the front door, their only chance of escape might be whatever waited beneath the floor. The voices outside grew louder with every passing second. Daniel remained perfectly still, one hand gripping the iron hatch while Max stood beside him, every muscle tense. The German shepherd's eyes never left the old wooden door of the pump house. A vehicle door slammed, then another. Heavy boots crunched across the gravel outside. They're inside. Search the building. Without another thought, Daniel pulled the hatch open. A narrow metal ladder disappeared into darkness. Max descended first without hesitation. Daniel quietly lowered the hatch behind them just as the pump house door burst open above. Flashlights swept across the room. The hidden chamber beneath the floor remained silent. Daniel switched on his flashlight. The underground tunnel was much narrower than the passage beneath the ranger station. Old water pipes ran along the stone walls, their surfaces covered with rust. The air smelled cool and damp. Max moved carefully ahead, stopping every few yards to listen. Above them, muffled footsteps echoed across the pump house floor. Someone was searching every corner. They couldn't have vanished. "Keep looking." Daniel waited until the voices drifted farther away before continuing deeper into the tunnel. After nearly 50 yards, the passage widened into a circular chamber. Unlike every place they had discovered before, this room looked untouched. In the center stood a heavy steel cabinet bolted to the floor. The brass key Samuel had left fit perfectly into its lock. Daniel turned it slowly. The cabinet door opened with a metallic click. Inside rested only one object, a thick leather folder. Across the front, Samuel had written two simple words: "Final report." Daniel carefully lifted it out. The pages inside were remarkably well preserved. Samuel had documented everything: dates, names, vehicle registrations, detailed maps, financial records, copies of official permits that had been forged. Every accusation was supported by photographs and handwritten notes. Near the end of the report, Daniel found the final developed photograph. His hands froze. The image clearly showed several men placing explosive charges beneath one of the bridge supports shortly before the storm. Standing beside them was a man wearing an official park supervisor's uniform. Daniel recognized the face immediately. It matched the young supervisor shown in the old photograph from the ranger station. The bridge had never failed naturally. It had been destroyed deliberately. Samuel had uncovered the truth before anyone else. The final page contained one last handwritten message: "If this report survives, my name will finally be cleared." Daniel quietly closed the folder. 40 years of unanswered questions suddenly made perfect sense. Samuel had never abandoned his duty. He had sacrificed everything to protect the truth. Max suddenly growled. Not loudly, just enough to warn Daniel. Voices echoed from the tunnel behind them. They're underground. Move, their hiding place had been discovered. Daniel quickly placed the report inside his backpack. There was no time to examine the rest of the cabinet. The tunnel continued beyond the chamber. Without hesitation, Max ran forward. Daniel followed, The passage climbed steadily upward before ending beneath a rusted iron grate. Daylight filtered through the gaps. Daniel pushed. The grate lifted. Fresh evening air rushed inside. They emerged onto a hillside overlooking Raven Creek Valley. Far below, the old bridge stretched across the water, glowing beneath the setting sun. Behind them, angry voices echoed from inside the tunnel, but the strangers were too late. Daniel now carried Samuel Reed's complete report. The evidence was finally beyond their reach. He looked down at Max and smiled. "You did it, partner." The German shepherd wagged his tail once before, looking toward the ranger station in the distance. Tomorrow, after 40 long years, Samuel Reed's story would finally be told, and the truth hidden beneath Raven Creek Bridge would belong to history forever. Within days, the evidence Daniel Carter recovered from beneath Raven Creek Bridge was delivered to state investigators. Samuel Reed's journals, photographs, official reports, and the undeveloped film were carefully restored by forensic specialists. The final film revealed exactly what Samuel had described 40 years earlier. Several men were seen placing explosive charges beneath one of the bridge supports only hours before the storm arrived. The flood had damaged the structure, but the bridge had already been deliberately weakened. The official investigation was immediately reopened. Archived employment records, financial documents, and Samuel's detailed notes confirmed every part of his report. The criminal network had used the abandoned bridge to hide an illegal archaeological smuggling operation for years. Closing the bridge after the explosion had protected their secret while placing the blame on a natural disaster. Most importantly, Samuel Reed's name was finally cleared. He had never abandoned his post. He had never disappeared while running away. He had remained faithful to his duty until the very end. The news spread quickly throughout the state. Former rangers, retired rescue workers, historians, and local families gathered at Raven Creek National Park for a special memorial service honoring the ranger whose courage had remained hidden for 4 decades. At the entrance to the restored bridge park, officials unveiled a bronze monument bearing Samuel's name. Beneath it were simple words, "Truth never stops waiting." Daniel stood quietly beside the memorial. Max sat proudly at his side. Visitors smiled as they recognized the German shepherd whose determination had uncovered the first clue beneath the bridge. Children gently patted Max's head while photographers captured the emotional moment. Without Max's extraordinary instincts, Samuel's sacrifice might have remained forgotten forever. Weeks later, Raven Creek Bridge officially reopened to the public for the first time in 40 years. Families crossed it together. Hikers stopped to admire the beautiful valley below. Information panels along the walkway told Samuel Reed's story, reminding visitors that courage sometimes survives long after those who show it are gone. As the sun began to set on opening day, Daniel returned alone with Max to the middle of the bridge. The creek flowed peacefully beneath them, just as it had 40 years earlier. Daniel rested one hand on the old wooden railing. "We kept your promise," he said softly. Max looked down at the quiet water before raising his head toward the forest beyond. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley. Daniel smiled and clipped Max's leash onto his harness. "Come on, partner. There are still people to protect." Together, the ranger and his loyal German shepherd walked across the bridge toward the glowing sunset. Behind them remained a place that had once been filled with unanswered questions. Ahead of them waited new trails, new adventures, and new lives to save. Some bridges connect 2 sides of a river. Others connect the past with the truth, and sometimes all it takes to reopen one is a loyal German shepherd who simply refuses to walk away.